Following years of establishing a reputation in Christian television and portraying a picture of a solid, religiously orientated family, the life of Joanie Lamb has taken an unexpected turn that has shocked the public due to her constant appearance on Dare, and because of her commitment to ministry. Joni is now at the heart of an intensely private. The public had always seen her in crisis and her spouse as an invincible partnership. However, hostilities have been escalating behind hidden away, but now the truth is out. The life of Joanie Lamb has taken an unforeseen and tragic turn, and she lately expressed her feelings of silence. The unpleasant truth of what actually occurred in the background. How will this impact her future? So pay attention as we discover the startling truth about her transformative epiphanies and conjecture issues in the marriage of the murmurs of Joanie Lamb and Doug Weiss started long before the general public was aware that there was impending conflict in the marriage of initially Joanie Lamb and Doug Weiss. The rumors were subtle and merely included the casual comments made by insiders who observed minor alterations in their dynamic, but as time passed, the conjecture grew louder, propelled by their progressively tense public appearances as well as the odd quiet from both on social media. For a large number of the getting married had felt like a dream come true. Following Marcus Lamb's passing, Joni had fell in love with Doug Weiss once more. Renowned Christian counselor, their relationship was shown as evidence of newfound healing, faith, and start, but there are fissures behind the scenes had first begun to develop. Admirers rejected it as each marriage has its peaks and valleys, yet as time passed, according to several insiders, Doug was contending with the demands of being he has spent years working in the spotlight as a well-known counselor who assists couples manage difficult relationships, but stepping into the Christian world, television was entirely different. Being Joanie Lamb's spouse meant that every action he took was closely examined, and the past was continuously scrutinized, and that any error on his part might become a headline. According to some, there was a lot of pressure, and that it was beginning to have an impact on his friendship with Joni. However, the even more startling, there were reports that Doug was facing legal issues even though nothing was verified. Rumor has it that there were financial issues from his previous life catching up with him, perhaps because of, according to some, his counseling practice, that he had participated in court cases, disagreements over business transactions, while others said his name had arrived up in ongoing inquiries nobody was aware of. Unquestionably, but the reality that these reports were even making the rounds prompted concerns. Did Joni know this before they received married, or had she just gotten married? Found something that made her challenge everything with a different idea that became popular was that she and Doug had serious differences of opinion regarding the future of their work in ministry. Some, according to accounts, Doug had his own thoughts about how things need to be conducted, and that these variations had resulted in a lot of conflict between them. Some even conjectured that Doug might have desired a more prominence in the network. Joni, however, had been hesitant to any significant adjustments may have made this their marriage's breaking point. The public had no responses, but every week passed, more individuals began to question what actually happened. Fans who had formerly thought that the power of the union of Joni and Doug was now full of uncertainties, questioning whether the relationship was crumbling behind closed doors, or if Doug had anything to conceal, and above all, how long had there have been rumors that the silence from things were only made worse by Joni and Doug, as neither of them specifically addressed the conjecture that caused people to think that some members of the public had more questions than before. Following the disclosure that Joni and for some time Doug had been living apart, it wasn't clear exactly when this had started, but according to insiders, Joni had been focusing exclusively on her ministry and evading inquiries regarding her private life. If this were accurate, it indicated that their union had been in a lot longer than anyone had difficulties realized that abandoning admirers their romantic tale, feeling deceived and perplexed as to how their photo was flawless. Marriage became a partnership full of separation and unresolved issues growing apart, or was there another factor at play? Much more occurring in the background, for the truth was still uncertain at this point, but one there was no doubt that something was occurring between Doug and Joanie Lamb Weiss, and the moment was just around the corner, until the reality of the situation emerged regarding the what he would do to you after sending you a sexual SMS. I don't want to mention that we discussed, I don't disclose to anyone that we have sex. Ads about sex, but he's never had any. He never mentioned anything to me unsuitable, and we didn't engage in sexual activity. Prior to our marriage, he was well known for his moral character. Therefore, this was only a sexual converse when Joni informed me of those things that are dragging them down once more and telling you know what aspects of the book you were thrilled when I sent you. But I wasn't. I'm not sure how to handle it, so I don't talk to. We discussed sex with individuals for around 2 advertisements, but he never sent a text to me or said anything unsuitable. He's renowned for his moral character, so when she begins discussing it with me, which I'm keeping that to myself since I'm beginning to understand anxious and my body is beginning to act strangely, that's when I get panicked. For instance, an attack began to occur at the time she read this to me, and Rachel on the opposite side. You know what's happening, but I won't tell you. Tell them that when Jimmy comes in, she trusted the picture of her, and before to our 6-person meeting with Jimmy Evans, I gave Jimmy a private call since I don't wish to disparage her or talk about that. I gave Jimmy a call the day before the meeting, alone, in front of her other children, and I said, hey, this, and he will attest to it, is something I find difficult to comprehend. Could you please help me process this? Is it okay? After a divorce, life can be painful, shocking, and public response to the Christian community was taken aback upon learning of Joanie Lamb. Then the divorce of Doug Weiss began since they had only a few months before gave the impression of a powerful and a devoted couple is proof of love. Following a loss, now that is being cautious, the created image had collapsed, leaving open-ended questions behind Joanie's bewilderment and sadness. Divorce was not merely the conclusion of a marriage, it was a future gone bad. She had previously stood because she believed in her affection is being shared by millions of others. Tale, thinking that God had bestowed upon her a second opportunity for happiness following the loss of Marcus Lamb, but she had to now acknowledge the reality that what she had thought it would last forever finished a lot earlier than she had as expected. In private, Joanie was overcome with emotion. She had spent presenting herself for years as a woman of faith without faltering, but now she was confronted with an extremely private matter in the most public manner, showcasing every facet of her. All of her actions were scrutinized, was interrogated, and all she stated was greeted with speculation, so she wanted to mourn quietly, but there was no way to keep the public's attention away from the. However, he had his own issues, established a reputation as a union advisor, and he knew that he was incapable of preserving his own marriage. Credibility was being questioned. Query, and the responses from those mixed Jans were the ones next to them. Kids who had accepted Doug into they were struggling as a family. Evaluating the events that had occurred, they had backed their mother's choice to believe that being married again was a blessing after Marcus' passing, and they now felt protective of her and wishing to keep her safe. Escape the judgment and criticism that was from every angle. They witnessed how much she was in anguish, and they detested the fact that she had to go through yet another heartache under such widespread public examination of Doug's death. Friends were also split on some issues. He had been wrongly judged by the people, asserting that unions terminate for a numerous explanations and that there was none of their enterprise what had genuinely occurred between Joanie and him. The media swiftly assessed the issue, with several Christian publications adopting taking a compassionate stand and saying prayers, offering encouraging remarks for both Doug and Joanie. Other sources with less headlines that conjectured about forgiving why had some suggestions gone wrong. Joanie had been caught off guard by the divided others, implying that Doug had been battling in the background for occasionally under pressure from their creating a C in their public life relationship, and still others are recommending that Doug had desired to get out of the married for some months, but had stayed keeping quiet to prevent censure from others, implying that Joanie discovered something she was unable to overlook that forced her to make the difficult choice to depart, despite the fact that there were reports that the divorce was prearranged for a very long time, and that they both had been secretly getting ready for this. Joanie kept her cool for a moment in public by using articulate remarks about concentrating on her ministry and having faith in the purpose of God. She was aware that people were watching. She didn't want them to see her up close, how much she was having trouble, but she was lagging behind closed doors. She was also grieving for Doug, attempted to remain anonymous, yet the Christian community didn't have it easy, is not renowned for its ability to forgive figures with ease, and the criticism he received was severe, according to several untruthful about his prior concealment, things that were just now starting to evident. But some supported him by asserting that nobody truly understands what occurs within a marriage, with the exception of individuals involved. Over time, the public's attention progressively moved away from the divorce's immediate shock to the inevitable question of what would occur. Would Joanie remarry Doug next? leaving the public ministry with neither of them ever talks about the complete truth about their breakup. Nobody understood the solutions, but one thing was definite, that this period of their life had concluded, and whatever transpired next would be viewed by millions of individuals. Will Doug Weiss be imprisoned due to a legal storm? As though the separation wasn't startling enough, rumors began to spread that Doug Weiss may face severe legal issues that might result in, initially, it sounded like just a prison. Another crazy conspiracy hypothesis inflated by social media and gossip columns. The first sign is media conjecture that there had been a miss when Doug started to pull away from he had been vocal in public regarding his counseling job for many years, giving talks at conferences and making appearances on social media and Christian television. Presence abruptly decreased, and invitations to functions that he had already committed to were canceled or inexplicably rescheduled. This sole strengthened the mounting suspicions that he was concealing information from an insider. Report later asserted that Doug had been subject to examination for financial misbehavior pertaining to his counseling work. Some, according to sources, anomalies had been found in his company transactions that are subject to legal scrutiny, whereas some asserted that he had been engaged in disputes with former customers, some of whom reportedly filed litigation against him. Notwithstanding the absence of official accusations had been verified, it was implied that Doug was in legal trouble. It was enough trouble to send shockwaves. Joni, through the Christian community, Lamb had previously had to contend with her second failure's terrible reality marriage, but she was now compelled to see the name of her ex-husband appear a possible legal dispute. According to she was in total control of those around her. Astonishment after basing her entire existence on religion, honesty, and the conviction that God's plan directed her own path, but now she was left questioning whether she had been tricked or had put his trust in someone he wasn't. Stated that the idea behind this made she had always been wary of her Johnny, considering Dare's standing and the simplicity with which the network might collapse due to a scandal. Marcus and she had determined that she was recognizing that some of the scrutiny can be even if she had nothing aimed at her. Some media sources were involved in it, already assuming how Johnny was well informed before the divorce, inquiring if she had gained any new knowledge that led her to split from Doug earlier. All collapsed, or whether she had been compelled to comply in order to safeguard Dare. The number of questions kept growing, and she lacked conclusive responses. In the meantime, Doug was coping with creating legal, and crisis analysts pondered what might happen if there was financial malfeasance involved, recommended that a look into his businesses might be carried out, leading to charges if he had violated any legislation relating to clients' privacy or embezzled money. The claims infuriated him, based on what others close to him felt that others were attempting to destroy his reputation through the consequences from the divorce. In order to further stir up controversy, he spent decades establishing his reputation in the realm of Christian counseling, and now everything he was aware that was in danger in the accused in a court of public opinion of, even without evidence. Misbehavior was frequently enough to destroy a person's career. Doug's followers stood by him, asserting that the accusations were merely rather than a deliberate attempt to undermine him, thinking that adversaries within the divorce was being used by the industry as a chance to further erode his reputational chance to get rid of him. But not everyone was certain, and some of his devoted fans began to question whether, after all, there was more to the tale. The source of these rumors wasn't a multiple sources, instead of just one. Reports from a variety of sources, all suggesting there was a problem. As time went on, tension rose, and even though there was no formal confirmation of the accusations, and rumors were sufficient on their own to damage Doug's churches, which had already asked him to speak privately, but stepped back to observe how things would occur prior to re-establishing his name was associated with them, appearing in Christian media in a manner that hadn't previously occurred as a respected advisor, but as someone who could have been a part of a controversy regarding Joni's legal rumors. But what could she claim to have spoken before regarding the suffering caused by the divorce? Although this was something entirely different. Some, according to accounts, she was instructed to keep silent to keep Dare and herself safe, while others claimed she was still processing everything and attempting to determine how, since things had gotten out of hand swiftly, if Doug was truly responsible for what would it indicate if something went wrong. Would people consider Joan to be a victim, or would they inquire about her choice to wed him in the beginning? Could she possibly reverse it if he was innocent? The harm that was already done, but one was certain of what would occur next. However, this was unquestionably lawful. The storm had not yet passed, and it had the potential to further alter everything. Rumors and controversies involving Joanie the marriage of Lamb. Since Joanie Lamb declared her union with Doug, the public was fascinated by Weiss's their narrative. A woman who had committed her journey of faith and service a fresh phase following the terrible her first husband's passing was a tale that appeared to be nearly divinely planned. But as time went on, the fairy story started to fall apart, and what had formerly a tale of love and soon after reconciliation was enmeshed in whispers, rumors, and outright scandal long before the news of their divorce was made public. Rumors circulated that Joanie and Doug's marriage was weaker than it at first. It seemed like the conjecture was that children observed that Doug wasn't showing up with Joanie as frequently as anticipated for public gatherings, where at one point they were spotted holding hands in hand and abruptly found themselves alone. First appearances on social media, fans believed their busy schedules were at fault since Joanie had Dare to oversee and Doug's own counseling ministry, but over time it grew harder to ignore. The fact that there was a mistake among the initial controversies to emerge was the assert that John's offspring had never completely in favor of the union in the top spot. According to some relative sources, there was conflict between the starting, since Joanie was keen to go on and discover joy once more, but her children were said to be more circumspect, due to the fact that they had personally observed their parents' joint lives and thought nobody could ever swap Marcus Lamb out. With some insiders even implied that John's choice to get married again shortly after Marcus' passing had resulted in there was conflict in the family. Rumors that private disputes have occurred behind closed doors, and despite the fact that the family always provided a public display of unity, the Fishers were already beginning to display the greatest. There were startling rumors that it was Doug Weiss who had married personal secrets. Even if Doug had been considered a respected advisor, some doubters began to cast doubt on his outside of his financial transactions and even the truthfulness of some of his expert assertions. That some conjectured Joanie had been so excited to begin a new phase in the warning that she had disregarded in her life indications, but some believed she had just had too much faith in someone whom he didn't appear to be in relation to both their private and public careers. Joanie had built her empire over decades alongside Dare, whereas Doug was used to running his own ministry with minimal reports of external influence. That Doug had desired a more significant position at Dare, but Joanie hesitated a little. According to accounts, Doug had anticipated to participate more actively in making decisions. Others implied that Joanie felt compelled to include him into a framework that has existed for a long time before he entered the scene. Their differences views on ministry leadership and the equilibrium between individual and professional lives have resulted in numerous disagreements behind closed doors. The previous, according to the most damning rumor, Joanie had learned about Doug and that she had no option but to dissolve their union. Some conjectured that this had something to do with he has been battling legal troubles. Naturally, the media covered every potential hypothesis that several outlets showed as a grieving widow. Joanie had been caught off guard by treachery, while others implied that she had hurried into the marriage too soon and was currently juggling considering the repercussions. Some even asserted overall the partnership had been more of a publicity stunt rather than true love tale in which both sides gained from the combination. That other people believed it to be anything with theories that is more intimate, ranging from dishonest financial practices to personal betrayals were not evident responses, but everyone concurred that Joanie had left the place because of something whole marriage, and she wasn't reflecting on the past.